I am Ewan. I'm going to do a quick run through who we have here. So starting over at the end, we have Dr. Nick Morgan, who's head of whiskey outreach for Diageo. Has anyone ever heard of Diageo? We're a small boutique Italian startup vermouth company. It's not Diego, we get that one all the time. That's Dora the Explorer's friend. And then in the middle, this bearded raconteur is Mr. David Broom, who writes about whiskey. Anyone heard of him? No, all right. And then, and then here we have Gregor Cattanach, who is National Whiskey Ambassador, Master of Whiskey for Diageo, who are that boutique startup who I mentioned at the beginning. Okay, so we have a very packed agenda. We have a lot to get through. We have 7 whiskies. So I'm going to give you a bit of a preface, a bit of a run through as to what we're going to be doing. But before I do anything, I have to say this, okay? We're going to be drinking high-strength alcohol this morning. No shit. We're going to be drinking high-strength alcohol this morning. The lowest proof here we're going to be tasting is 80 or 40 ABV. We're going all the way up to cask strength. We're going to be tasting whiskies of different strengths from different casks. They're all Scotch whiskies. And that's pretty much all we're going to tell them, right? For the time being. Yep. Nick?
Yeah, but we want you to help us by, when we ask you to talk about these whiskies, we want to know what you think about these whiskies, particularly at the end after we've gone through them. And so we're dependent on you to help us out. And a few things, we're not trying to make fools of anyone in this, okay? We're not trying to show people up because they don't know things. We're not going to be making remarks at the expense of competitors. It's not about anything to do with that. We're not even really going to be talking about brands, I don't think.
No.
This is just about thinking about these whiskies in the context of age, maturation, and wood. And the more you join in, more entertaining and educational it will be for all of us.
And it is going to be very interactive as well, so we are going to pick on people. Well, my 2 henchmen over here, Kyle and Nick, who all deserve a round of applause already because they're going to be working hard. So in front of you, you have your tasting mat. It should look like this. If it doesn't, you're in the wrong room. And on top of it, you will have a blank flavor map. You can actually take that off now. You should all have pens and water. There are 2 types of water. The one in the bottle is for diluting your whiskey, should you wish to. And that's it. It's interactive. It's going to be a lot of fun. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to taste some very, very unique whiskies that most people have never tasted before. Very rare whiskies. Some very unique cask samples that we've had sent over for Scotland specifically for this session. So you're all very lucky. So I am now going to hand you over to Gregor Cattanach, who is going to run through a few slides and explain maturation and what rejuvenation is.
Hi everyone, I'm Gregor, and I'm going to take you through a little bit about maturation. When you think about whiskey and when you think about all the distilleries in Scotland, what makes every distillery different? They all do basically the same thing, same ingredients, but it's the technique, it's the process. They're making new make whiskey spirit, and that spirit is going to fall into different categories of style, flavour, going from light style of spirit to heavy, and of course they're all separated into certain nuances and certain characters. But when it goes into the cask, that's what really fascinates me, because a lot of people think about maturation, long equals better, but it's not really the case. What's happening during maturation, of course, you're going to mature that spirit, you're going to develop flavours, you're going to allow things to happen, that magic happen. And what we tend to talk about at Diageo is the 3 mechanisms that are going on inside that cask. You see in the first one is subtractive. Now, if you think about bourbon casks are charred on the inside. We love to use ex-bourbon casks to mature whiskey. So that charring is really good for this mechanism. Along with oak is porous. It's watertight, but it's not airtight. So it allows some of these immature flavour compounds from the new make whiskey spirit to evaporate and go out into the atmosphere. The charring effect of the cask it'll act like your charcoal filter above a hob, where it holds on to some of these unwanted aromas that are coming off your cooking, especially my wife's cooking. But for example, here, these big sulfury compounds. So that's subtractive, very important. That's cask mechanism number one. Additive is all about what the cask is giving that new make's whiskey spirit. It's the wood-derived flavours that are being extracted from the cask. All these wonderful flavours. And it was interesting, last night I started reading about the simple flavours, which took me to the more complicated, to the more complicated, and before I knew it, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I felt very geeky, nerdy last night whilst everyone else was out partying. But here we've got vanillin and oak lactone. To me, that translates into that vanilla flavour you get in whiskey and coconut flavours. The interactive is quite fascinating as well, because you think of all these hundreds of flavour compounds within a cask, within the spirit, within the wood, and what's happening when they're coming together, when they're interacting together, where they're building this wonderful matrix of flavour. New flavours are appearing. It's that wonderful equation. It's like adding colours together, creating new colours. So the three mechanisms that are happening during maturation, really, really important, but there's a lot more involved, whether you need to know about the history of the cask, what's been in it beforehand, how big is it, how long are you maturing for. There's lots and lots of parts of maturation that's going to have an effect on flavour. So I'll hand it back to Ewan.
I think there's another slide, is there not?
I don't know, you've got the clicker.
No, I don't. I don't have the clicker, Dave.
Oh, okay, here's the new make whiskey character slide that I was talking about.
By the way, we did rehearse this for about 2 hours yesterday afternoon.
Yeah.
You would never guess, though, right? Seasoned pros that we are.
But that really shows you, that really translates into all of our malt distilleries in Scotland. Diageo have got 28 malt distilleries. There's all these distilleries. There's some that we look for a nutty character and spirit. Some are peaty, some are fruity. The reason that we've got so many different styles is to make different styles of single malts that the blenders can then use in their blending inventory to make either single malts or blends. Because you have to remember, a single malt is also a blend of casks. A single cask is whiskey that comes from one cask. A single malt is a blend of whiskey that's coming from many different casks from that single distillery. So, and then we'll get into more about the difference in flavours coming from the different cask types. The flavour wheel here, this is a great flavour wheel that kind of takes us from that process of new make spirit character to the maturation, the mechanisms that are happening and the flavours that are starting to develop. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, we've got this huge wide spectrum of flavours. And this is where the craft of right from the people that are doing the malting, through the distilling, maturation, the blending, whiskey science team, the distillers, this is really where the craft comes into play, because you can't just make too much of one thing and too little of another. It's got to be this wonderful array of flavours for our company to choose from to make these quality single malt and blended Scotch whiskies.
And I think we're going to move on to you now, Dave, with our first whiskey.
Thank you very much, Ewan.
You're very welcome.
Well, good. We're all being so polite up here. Hello, everybody. I'm not going to, obviously, this is a blind tasting, just in case you hadn't realised. We're not going to tell you what these whiskies are. Well, we might later on. So maybe some ground rules as far as blind tasting goes. Blind tasting is the most honest way to approach any liquid. It's not a game, so the last thing, honestly, you should be trying to do is trying to guess what's in front of you. Because as soon as you try and guess what's in front of you, that way madness lies. Trust me, because you begin to impose all the things you think that whiskey represents into that glass. So the whole point about blind tasting is to have a completely honest analysis of the liquid that's in front of you. So don't try and second guess, please. We will, a germ of an idea will probably drift into your mind at one point. You can hold on to that and say, well, maybe, but please don't think, they're bound to be giving us one of those, because trust me, these whiskies are pretty weird, some of them. So
We-
so be honest, please.
We did something similar to this. Ewan and I did it in New York with about 6 whiskies, and we had about 60 people in the room. One person identified one whiskey out of all of that sort of possibility. And I think he spent his whole hour trying to guess what that one whiskey was, which was seriously not the point of the exercise. So Dave's absolutely right. Forget all the names and things you might think of. It's not going to help.
He also came on his own, I think.
He was on his own,
And
definitely.
left on his own as well. On the backs of your tasting mats, the blank flavour maps, you can actually make notes on there as well. So as we go through each of these whiskies, make some cursory notes as to what you think these are, what you think they were matured in. Is it an ex-bourbon barrel or is it a sherry barrel? You can even have a stab at what you think it is or what the proof or the ABV is. So I think we're going to go through the flavour map now, but you can start tasting that whiskey as Dave talks a little bit about the flavour map, which is the next slide.
Yeah, just a very quick thing about tasting the whiskey. So, the rules of tasting, nosing and tasting, these are not the ideal Riedel glasses that you would normally use. So you might have to work just that little bit harder. You'll probably have to use the retronasal method more than just sticking your nose in the glass. So actually taking sips of it and then exhaling and getting all the aromas coming out. For the aromas are just kind of drifting off into the ether with that. So really concentrate on the palate. Pick up, look at this and think about levels of maturation, any indications as to what kind of cask type, how light is it, how heavy is it, what's the texture? Is it going to be big and grippy and tannic, or is it soft and gentle? And as we move through this presentation, we're not going to kind of overload you with information at this one point, but various clues will begin to be fed in as we progress through the tasting. So have a wee look at that and just note down some simple things, and I'll explain the flavour map, which we're also going to be using, and I'll probably stand up at this point. So very simple matrix, as would be used in blending labs for whiskey, for rum, for all manner of spirits. And the way it works on the vertical axis, it moves from this delicacy, which is just maybe 1 or 2 very clean flavours, not a huge degree of complexity, but good fresh whiskey, moving up this. And as you begin to move up this line, there is an increase in complexity. As soon as you go over this line, there is a perceptible, it might only be a tiny amount, but there's a little bit of smoke beginning to develop. The higher up you get, the smokier and scarier the whole thing gets. Here there be dragons. There's lots of smoke up here. And then the horizontal line, over here you're moving from lightness, so like fresh fruits, a lot of estery notes, apple, pineapple, banana, into a grassy character, into nuttiness, into kind of softer fruits. As soon as you flip over the line, this is where cask becomes more important. American oak, with its all vanilla and lactone that Gregor was talking about, into European oak, with its dried fruit and resin and tannin, and a general pickup of richness. The important thing about the flavour map is there's no one better place on this map than any other. At the moment, there's about 250 malts which have been mapped on this. And they work in various clusters. And it really, really works for consumers. And it works for bartenders as well. If you're looking at your whiskey range in the bar, use a flavour map and say, you like smoky whiskies, but you might have too many smoky whiskies and you aren't actually covering all the flavours off. If you're a consumer and you're scared of whiskey, you're not very sure where to go, well, you find your reference point, which could be Glenlivet, for example. So it's a very handy, generic tool. So remember those rules, because you'll be plotting those on the map, and we'll come back and talk about that later. Okay?
Thank you, Dave. And I think we're going to move on to our second whiskey now with Gregor. So it's the one with the number 2 under it, funnily enough. And you just have to take one look at it, and you can pretty much guess the wood type that's involved here. But Gregor is going to take us through a little bit of a tasting. And
Are you a moderator, or are you just saying it?
I'm saying everything. As moderator, I think I'm allowed to, right? Shut your face. So let's click forward onto, there you go. Gregor?
Anything left?
Yeah. Thanks, Ewan.
You're very welcome.
Whiskey number 3. Yeah, this is an interesting whiskey. I love that word, interesting. It means I've got nothing else to say. But if you look at the colour, yeah, it's dark. So what does that tell us? Might tell us the wood type, it might not. You know, there's these simple rules of thumb in whiskey, and then they can go all to pot. You think, oh, because it's dark, it's a sherry cask, or oh, it's this, that, the next thing. But if you look at that, it probably does shout out either a heap of spirit caramel or it's been in a sherry cask. If you have a little smell of this, it's definitely shouting out sherry cask. That European oak. When we talked about the cask mechanisms here, the additive, you know, you're extracting these flavors and it's coming out of European oak versus American oak, so probably not as much of that vanillin and lactone. It's more the rich fruities, the tannins perhaps in here. But have a little smell, have a little taste, and enjoy.
Very important with this one to really sluice it around the front of your mouth. You know, pretend you think you're drinking wine, get it around the front of your teeth.
Or like mouthwash.
Or indeed like mouthwash.
Yeah.
And don't forget you have water as well you can dilute this with, should you wish to.
And again, think in terms of flavour map. The flavour map then becomes actually quite an interesting method and tool to actually get your ideas down rather than just thinking about what the... Because we do the flavour map blind, we use blue glasses so we can't actually see colour. And it just gives us an idea, you just really concentrate on the flavour, so it's a good way to actually go, well, it should be over here, it should be over there.
And moving on to the next slide is the one that we all got very excited about. This is the killer graph, ladies and gentlemen, that Dave is going to take us through. This is going to change your life if you are losers like us.
Fly me to the moon. Yeah, the killer graph. A phenomenal piece of work. I think every single notebook which I have has got this drawn in it at some point, because I'll have had a conversation with somebody in a bar, usually in a bar, actually. Or it might be a pub, but, you know, either be a pub or a bar. And we'll be talking about whiskey, and they'll say, you know, tell us about, you know, age. They might be talking about wood, or you might be talking about age, etc., etc. And these simple lines explain a vast amount about whiskey, and this is the central point of what this presentation is all about. Age is just a number. Maturity is a character. Don't get hung up on numbers, because numbers can trip you up. Age is not a determinant of quality either. The older the whiskey is simply tells you how long it's been in the cask. It doesn't tell you how good that whiskey is. The only way you can tell how good the whiskey is, how complex and how balanced it is by nosing and by tasting it and seeing what the level of maturity is. So the way that this killer graph works is that up here is distillery character, spirit character, and that remains at a constant all the way through. So from the moment it's born all the way through, that's the character of that individual distillery. So you've got 115 odd distilleries operating in Scotland at the moment. Every single one is going to be milling and mashing and fermenting, distilling twice, occasionally 3 times, aging in oak casks for a minimum of 3 years. You walk around all these distilleries and you see essentially the same kit. But every single one has an individual distillery character. As I said yesterday in the class, single malt whiskey, singularity, individuality, that's what's important. When it's come off the still, when it's still new make spirit, there's lots and lots of that immaturity going on. The immaturity will be sulfury compounds or just general aggressiveness, you know, aye, like that. You know, you take a sip of new make whiskey, it's up at you, especially peaty ones. You need to lose that, and that does disappear. So that's your subtractive maturation. As this line drops off, it's either evaporating off or it's been absorbed into the cask, as Gregor said. As soon as it goes into the cask, so you begin to see the wood talking to the spirit, and you get this uptake of wood influence coming through. So you can see at this point, immaturity is now being overtaken by the cask influence. So here is a starting point where you might want to start bottling your whiskey. But the wood will always win out. So as you continue to move up that line, you get to this point. And at this point and above this point, what happens is that you've lost your distillery character. You spent all that time and effort making something that is unique to that distillery, and you've put it in a cask, and the cask is dominated, and you can't tell where the hell it's come from. Now that is where you don't want to be in terms of single malt. You don't want the cask to overcook the whiskey, and just to be about the cask and not about the individual single malt. It might be an interesting drink, but it's not an interesting single malt, because single malt is about individuality. And this can be used in so many different ways, because we'll come on to this in more detail with Nick, but very, very simply, you'll see that there's no numbers on here, because every cask is different. If you've got a fresh cask, brand new cask, say in America, with brand new wood, you're going to run along that line very quickly, and the cask is going to dominate very quickly. First time it's filled, it's going to move slightly slowly, but eventually you'll get to that point. If the cask is absolutely exhausted and it's got nothing more to give, there's no more flavors coming from the wood, you could spend 20 years in that cask because the cask is knackered, as we say, and you've still got lots and lots of immaturity. It's a 20-year-old whiskey or a 30-year-old whiskey, but because there's no interaction been taking place, the whiskey isn't actually any good. And you've looked at the number and you think, oh, that's nice, it's 30 years old, it must be good. No, it's about maturity. That's the important point. So the killer graph, very handy piece of kit.
So as a wonderful segue, Nick is going to back this up with a little bit more detail on wood types and how that affects that.
In Scotland, to mature whiskey, we use two types of wood, predominantly. We use American oak and we use European oak, okay? On American oak, we have three types of casks that we tend to use. And just, I assume you know that when we get casks from America, we get them broken down into staves. And we for Diageo, they go to our cooperage. They're rebuilt into what we call hogsheads, which are about 250 litres-ish. The American standard barrels are 230?
200.
200, okay. 200. So these, what we call here, these first fill American oak hogsheads, are clearly very, very active. They're going to give a lot of what you would call bourbon character to Scotch whiskies. We tend to use them in Scotland for grain whiskey rather than single malt whiskey. So most single grains are filled into these first fill American oak hogsheads. And if you've tasted single grain whiskies, you will know that very often, they have vanilla characters that are very similar to bourbons. Most of our single malts are filled into what we call refill hogsheads. So that means it's a barrel or a broken down barrel that way in the past has had bourbon, it's had at least one fill of grain whiskey, and then it's going to have malt whiskey in it, because we don't want the wood to be as active as it is for single grains. And you'll see, if you look at the activity on those two graphs, there's a very different activity pattern between the first fill American oak and the refill American oak. And that's, in Diageo, in fact, that is where we mature, by far and away, the majority of our single malt whiskey. So out of the 8 million casks that we've got, I would imagine somewhere between 6.5 and 7 at the moment are refill American oak hogsheads. And strangely enough, they can, particularly if you think of a whiskey like Lagavulin 16-year-old, which everyone always says is it's sherry casks. It's not. It's not in European oak. It's in refill American oak hogsheads. But if you use the wood properly, the whiskey goes in it in the right way, you can get very rich characters out of it, as well as a sort of more typical American profile. Then the thing I want to talk a little more about, because this is where it gets quite interesting, are what we call rejuvenated casks. So imagine those staves have come from the United States, been made up into a hogshead, they've been filled with grain whiskey once, possibly twice, certainly once. They've then been filled with malt whiskey once, twice, possibly 3 times, by which point that cask could be 15, 20, 25, 30, 40 years old, okay? And by that time, and we have a very clever way of judging it, we would take that cask to be exhausted. So the cask has got to the point where it can give, in terms of that additive process that Dave said, it can give nothing to the whiskey and it can barely take anything away from the whiskey. And what we do then, and what we've been doing for about 25 years, is go through a process of what we call rejuvenation. So that cask goes back to our cooperage. Inside layer of wood is stripped away. And that used to be done by guys with just sort of metal things, scrubbing away, scraping away. We now have a machine that will do it calibrated perfectly. So we know exactly how much wood to take off the cask to release specific types of flavors, okay? And our blenders will determine for all the casks exactly how they want it prepared in terms of the amount of wood that's taken out, and also as to how that cask is then recharred. Because you'll be aware from bourbon industry, char casks in a number of different ways, depending on what outcome you want from maturation. So we have built a new cooperage to do this at a place called Cambus in the Central Belt in Scotland. And it's a place of wonder. I don't see anyone in this room that I think has visited it. I know these guys have all been there. I mean, that way, Dave, that way. And you should think of this place, this cooperage, really not as a cooperage, it's a flavor factory. Okay? It's a flavor factory because we are so, and I'm not boasting here, after 25 years of research, we're so good at these rejuvenated casks that we really know exactly how to prepare them specifically to deliver character at the end of the process, okay? And of course, we can rejuvenate casks 2, 3, potentially 4 times before we compromise the ability of the wood to give and take. So we've got wood technologists looking at the thickness of staves and all this stuff. It's really, really sophisticated. And also before we compromise the integrity of the cask, because clearly it's got to still be able to hold liquid and have all the strength that's inherent of it. And that potentially means, if any of you are interested in this sort of thing, that we can use a cask for longer than it takes for a tree to grow to make a cask. And some people seem to make a virtue of just using a cask once. I think if you can use a cask for that length of time, it's actually quite a funky thing to be able to do. Now, I almost cried yesterday in the seminar that Dave was taking part in with Stephen Marshall and Ryan Chetty when they were looking at new single malt whiskies that Dewars are releasing. And most of those whiskies were absolutely sublime, and the reason for that is because they come from distilleries that Diageo used to own. that point was not fully acknowledged yesterday, and I just want to make
that was our gift to them.
That was our gift to them. And one of them, when we sold them to Bacardi when they bought the Dewars brand, as part of the deal. And one of them, we were absolutely distraught to lose. We weren't that happy, actually, about losing any of them, but there was one in particular, and that was Royal Brackler. And the Royal Brackler that we nosed yesterday was lovely whiskey, fruits, honey, slightly waxy texture. There was a huge amount in it. It's a Speyside whiskey, by the way, in case you don't know. Really, really lovely and complex. And it's a great reminder, and I think Dave made the point, of why you shouldn't think that smoky whiskies are the best. You know, because when you taste something that's as complex and as wonderful as that, you realize that these whiskies have got their place. And this whiskey number 3, simply reminds me of that. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about it. When you think about it, look for fruits, different sorts of fruits, slight woody character, perhaps, I don't know. It's got an interesting texture. Think about that. Again, think about how old you think it is, maybe where it comes from in Scotland, and certainly where you would put this on the map. But this is a really classic piece.
And start thinking about, you know, having had that killer graph explained, you know, how much wood influence is coming through here. Is this all really distillery character, or is there huge oak influence coming through? And that'll give you another idea of where things are positioned.
I think in the interest of time, as they're tasting it, Nick, we'll move on to the next slides, which are European oak, I think.
Yeah. Most of the European oak casks that are used have come from Spain. Many of the sherry casks that are used in the industry are made of American oak and have been treated with wine to give a sherry character, to try and pretend it's a European oak cask. And that's a practice that's gone on in the Scotch whisky industry since the 1870s. so for well over 150 years. It's a practice that's still used today. So when distillers talk about using sherry casks and stuff, very often they're American oak casks, which sometimes are sent to Spain. They are filled with sherry there and kept in a bodega for
well, it can be
a
18
short
months.
amount of time.
Yeah.
Can be 18 months.
Can be up to, yeah.
Yeah, can be 18 days, I suspect, sometimes, and are then brought back to be used. Activity pattern in a European oak cask is very different, and of course, at the end of the day, you're going to get these very rich, spicy, winey flavours, and those can also go very badly wrong if the whiskey is kept in the cask for too long.
European oak is also very high in tannin, naturally speaking. So if you have any sort of high levels of tannin, it's a good idea that that's going to be a first fill ex-sherry European oak cask. Just a clue there.
And I think we're moving on to whiskey number 4.
Whiskey number 4. I think that's mine.
It is you, Dave.
Thank you, Ewan.
Welcome.
I think when you stick your nose in the glass here, hopefully, I mean, this is a real test as to how hungover you are. You know, as to, you know, if you can't pick out the character of this one, I would give up here. Because, you know, you're looking for distillery character. You're looking, you know, and one of the things to do when using, say, something like the flavour map is it smoky or isn't it? Well, that might be one of the questions that you ask yourself with this whiskey. Is this smoky or not? And the next question you ask yourself, and this is kind of automatic, you don't actually have to say it because people will look at you in an odd way. Say it internally. You know, is this light or is this heavy? Is this fresh or is this fruity? You know, is this delicate, is it rich? You know, and begin to kind of subdivide and kind of work your way into exactly what the character of each whiskey is. You know, has this got a huge amount of wood on it or not? Is it smoky or not? And with that, you can then begin to ascertain levels of maturity, levels of vibrancy, and levels of oak influence. And that's all I'm going to say about it.
I'll give you one clue. This isn't Klein Leash. You probably picked up on that, though.
Dave mentioned smoke 6 times, I think.
Not that he's
I was asking a
repetitious
question.
by any means. All right, Nick, I think you're up.
Right. While you're
Very brief history lesson.
yeah.
Time
While you're puzzling over the character of whiskey number 4, I was asked to give a very brief history lesson, but I've discovered at Tales that it's not about people coming here and abusing alcohol. It's not about people coming here and abusing their bodies. It's for the most part about people coming here and abusing history, from what I can judge from many of the seminars I've been in. I just had to get that off my chest, actually. So this isn't history. What I'm actually going to do very quickly is just a bit of context, because you're aware, I'm sure you're aware there's an issue and a debate going on about age in whiskey, non-age whiskies coming on the market, all that sort of stuff. So I thought it might be interesting very quickly just to talk about the single malt category and how it's developed and why it's developed as it is today, and possibly, if you like, where it's going. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to assume just for a moment that you don't know a great deal about Scotch whisky. I'm sure many of you do, but just in case. In Scotland, we make 3 types of whisky, predominantly, just to keep it simple, okay? We make single malt Scotch whisky. It's a batch process in, relatively speaking, small distilleries that use copper pot stills, many of them heart-achingly beautiful in the most astonishing parts of Scotland. Defies sense and logic why these distilleries are in many of these places. There are about 100, 110 single malt distilleries in operation at the moment, and combined, if you wish to write this down, you may, they produce 315 million litres of alcohol a year. So that's a lot of juice. And don't forget that. For all, you know, we'll come here with different hats on, different presentations, and we'll show you the beautiful pictures, and it's about a man and his dog running the distillery. It's 315 million litres of alcohol a year. Type 1. Type 2, single grain Scotch whisky. There are 8 single grain Scotch whisky distilleries in Scotland. They are, generally speaking, in less heartbreakingly beautiful parts of Scotland. We make whisky there on a continuous process. that was pioneered over 150 years ago, beginning of the 19th century. The coffee still, or the patent still, which is everyone's familiar with that. And in those 8 distilleries, we make 385 million litres of alcohol a year. So they're a bit bigger than most single malt whiskey distilleries, okay? They're big, and they're important. Third type of whiskey we make is when we mix together single malt whiskey and single grain whiskey, which are both produced to very strict and stringent regulations. They all have to be matured for at least 3 years in oak casks in Scotland before they can be called whiskey. We blend those together and we produce blended Scotch whiskey. So 3 types of whiskey, okay? In 2013, combined, the industry sold over 100 million 9-litre cases of Scotch whiskey. That's a lot of juice, okay? That's a lot of juice. Of which around 93% was blended Scotch whiskey. So the Scotch whiskey industry exists to produce blended Scotch. The single malts that almost every distillery produces, almost every distillery, there are exceptions, and I'm sure you'll know them, I don't need to name them. Those single malts produced to exacting quality criteria are made predominantly to be used in blends. We are the very lucky recipients of the obsessions that all of these distillers have in terms of how well they make their whiskey for blends, that they also bottle some of it as single malts. We're very lucky that they care so much about blends that they make great single malts for us to drink, okay? Of that over 100 million cases of Scotch whiskey that's sold every year, between 75 and 80% does not carry an age statement. Between 75 and 80% of all the Scotch whiskey that's sold in the world does not carry an age statement. Okay? Now, single malts. Dave said this yesterday, we discussed it often, a new category. Okay, we've been making something like single malt whiskey in Scotland since 1494, all that history stuff, James IV, William of Orange, hey. all these people, William of Orange, very important. But the category of single malt has only existed since effectively the mid-1960s. And everyone in this room, if you're a single malt enthusiast, including myself, all my other colleagues from Diageo and Dave as well, we all owe a huge debt of honour to William Grants, who decided to launch and promote Glenfiddich as a single malt in the mid-1960s. And the reason that that great brand is still the leading single malt brand is what economic historians called first mover advantage. Okay? First mover advantage. And as I say, a big debt of honour to William Grant. Even then, the single malt category as we understand it today didn't really start until the mid to late 1980s. And I have to say, debt of honour to my former colleagues. If you work in Diageo, most colleagues are former colleagues pretty quickly. But my former colleagues who developed what we called at the time the classic malts in 1987, which was a sort of groundbreaking thing in terms of boutique malt suddenly coming to the market, beautifully packaged, lots of big bloody numbers on the labels, you know. How do I know Lagavulin's different from Talisker? Well, Lagavulin's 16, Talisker's 10. That's easy, I understand this. And from the late 1980s, then, you know, a proliferation of single malts in the market. Dave, I don't know how many single malts there were when you started working in Oddbins. A very famous UK spirits.
Not very many, probably about 20 brands, I would
20.
say. Yeah.
And now, you know, retailers have got hundreds and hundreds of single malts.
Yeah. At any point, there's between 2,500 and 3,000 single malts out there in the market. Some are single casks. It's a constantly moving feast, but you know, there's, as we say in Scotland, a hoorah, a lot of them. You know?
Dave will explain that later if you don't quite fully understand the reference.
No, he won't.
So it's a new category. It's priced at a premium level to blended Scotch whisky. The producers have got to have a way of selling it and of differentiating products, particularly things that have really got difficult names to pronounce. And by the way, it's the 1970s, the 1980s, even into the 1990s, when there is a huge amount of whiskey sloshing around in Scotland as a result of overproduction that happened actually as a result of investment in Scotch whiskey after the Second World War to earn dollars for the UK to aid post-war economic reconstruction. That's a bit of history for you. Take that one home. So age is the tool that producers use to differentiate products in the category and to justify price points. Simple as that. And as someone said on a very sort of knuckle-down debate that's going on at the moment on one of the websites about age, just actually said, it's a nice phrase, so I wrote it down. Age, a quantifiable attribute, made it easier to sell. It's as simple as that. When people don't understand the category, they don't frankly understand quality, hard one to get unless you've been drinking it for a long time. Age is what you use. And people have continued to use age. They've continued to be trapped, in effect, in the paradigm that they created, despite the fact that we've got great wood technologies, that people have used small casks and big casks, Lefroy quarter cask. Everyone went, well, yeah, it's a great funky innovation. No, you all know if you put whiskey in a smaller cask, what happens? It matures more quickly. You know, not always well. I mean, the Lefroy quarter cask is great, but not always well. But so you can do lots of things with wood, with finishing. Bill Lumsden at Glenmorangie, you know, blazed a trail there that no one could have imagined where that one would end up with. But people have still been wedded to age for about 20 years. Over 100 million cases of Scotch sold in the world, 75 to 80% doesn't have an age statement. Why? Because the people that sell blended Scotch whisky know it is simply not sustainable to have a category where age is the sole differentiator. You simply could not do that with blended Scotch whisky. It would be impossible. So we have a category where the majority of blends are differentiated by taste, by brand, of course, which is hugely important, and then you move into more premium areas and you start to see ages appearing. 12-year-old Johnny Walker Black Label, 12-year-old Chivas Regal, 18-year-old this, 21-year-old that, and then ironically, of course, right at the pinnacle of blends, no age statements at all. Johnny Walker Blue Label, King George V, stuff like that.
Game changer.
I would suggest, just finish off this point, I know I've gone a bit over time, I would suggest if you were to look at the single malt category in 10 years' time, you would find that it's very, very similar to the blended Scotch whisky category now. There will probably be almost no age statements for standard, what we might call standard or entry-level bottlings, and age will kick in at a premium, super premium, deluxe, whatever you want to call it, level. And that's what you're seeing now, and it's a painful process, which is why all these people that don't have many friends spend all their time sitting in their bedrooms getting very angry about it on the internet. You know, boy, they're like King Canutes, and I did say that very carefully, trying to stop the tide coming in. But boy, that tide will come in.
Was he related to William of Orange?
He might be related to William of Orange. What's next?
Thanks for keeping that brief, Nick.
What's next?
Whiskey number five.
Questions?
Whiskey number 5. This is mine as well. Okay, whiskey number 5.
Oh, God.
I will tell you that we searched high and low for this sample, okay? We searched high and low for this sample, and in the end, it could not be found amongst 8 million casks in Diageo's warehouses. So we're very grateful to a colleague who we're not going to name.
No, we are not.
Going to name, for letting us have this very interesting and unusual sample. And I think you need to think very carefully about the cask this has been in, very carefully. And you need to think very, very carefully about how old it might be as well. 2 key questions on this one. What sort of cask? How old it is. And actually, there's another one we didn't play. When we do this in some of the things we do, how much would you charge a bottle for this one? That's an interesting point. In a world where you can sort of make up prices, frankly, for single malts and people will pay them, how much would you put on that one?
Okay, I think
Gregor's going to talk to you.
Yeah, Gregor's going to inhale some helium to go through this part in 34 seconds. Go.
Excellent. Concept to bottle. Now, this is an interesting one. It's a very kind of long process, which I'll explain. There's a couple of things to keep in mind about the blending team. I always refer to Jim's team, well, as the blending team. Yes, they don't just make blends of, like your Johnny Walker blends. They're involved in the blending of casks. So just keep in your head that word blending. The blending of casks make a single malt. The blending of different distillery casks make a blended Scotch. So first of all, they're going to have a look at the brief. They're going to see what kind of character of whiskey the marketing team or whoever want them to make. What flavors does that market want? And then they actually have to have a look at their inventory. Now, Nick was talking about sales of whiskey and 100 million cases of whiskey. So that equates into quite a lot of casks of whiskey in storage in Scotland. Now, we've got, round about 8 million. I think in the industry there's, 20, 21, 22 million. But the blending inventory, that's when Jim and their team have to look to make sure they've got, well, first, enough whiskey to sustain and to supply the demand that's projected by the marketers, and then they have to make sure they've got the right type of whiskey, the right flavour of whiskey, the right style of whiskey. And it's about taking, whether it's a single malt. I will use Talisker Storm here as an example because that's not got an age statement, and it's using different styles and different ages of Talisker spirit from that distillery that's been matured in different cask types. So it's a real balancing act of flavour. You know, Talisker is a wonderful, the younger Talisker, now it used to be bottled at an 8-year-old many years ago. That was a wonderful, vibrant, kind of full of marine characteristics, just real, it captured the essence of the island, the Coolin Mountains. It was just absolutely beautiful. But that's a flavour that they wanted to have emphasis in the Talisker Storm. So they may perhaps use younger Talisker for that. But then, of course, what kind of cask? Is it a refill? Is it a first fill? Is it rejuvenated? Because you can see by the graphs that Nick and Dave spoke about different flavours. It's that keyword flavour. Flavour. That's why we have flavour and time rather than age. So they'll probably look at making something like Talisker Storm, maybe 50 different samples of different combination of cask types to get to the exact, the precise flavour and character that they are looking for, and then it will move on. So really the concept to bottle, of course, there's it's a much more complex process, but that's the real basics about the blending team, Jim and his team, understanding what they have in stock, what type of wood it's been matured in, and also for how long has it been in that cask for, because that's going to result in desired flavours they need to make that perfect bottle, whether it's a non-age declared single malt like Talisker Storm, or if it was Talisker 10-year-old, of course, the youngest cask in that blend of casks from the one distillery must be 10 years. So it's a real balancing act, and to be able to keep that consistency on single malt year in, year out is quite a beautiful, it's a beautiful thing. It really shows that understanding of the flavours that are happening, the wood management, the distillers, the craft of the distiller. It all comes together to create that wonderful bottle of whiskey. And talking about whiskey, we are going to now move on to whiskey number 6. Yeah.
I would recommend a little water in whiskey number 6 for sure.
Thanks for the tee off there, Nick.
It's okay, great.
Yeah, it's something that also will affect flavour is the amount of alcohol that's in the whiskey. That combination between the ethanol and water. Now, what's going to happen if you nose it at a high alcohol content? You're going to get a bit of a nose prickle, aren't you? You might want to add water to take it down to a strength that's going to be suitable for you, so you're going to be able to understand the flavour compounds that are in that glass. So it's also something to think about all the whiskies there. What is the alcohol content? Is it cask strength? What is cask strength? Is it bottle strength? What does it feel like on my palate? What does it feel like when I'm nosing that whiskey? But have a smell of this. There's some beautiful flavours in there. There's some obvious flavours that are shouting out, but not as obvious as the sample number 4. But this is a wonderful example of looking at distillery character and then trying to think about the use of casks and flavour. Flavour and time.
Okay.
Gregor.
We're going to move straight into whiskey number 7.
Not quite. No, I've got a few more things to say.
Oh, Jesus. All right.
No. Okay, these samples, I have to say, are getting a bit tired because they've been in these glasses for quite a long time, and I think you're probably getting a bit tired as well because you sort of have your nose gets exhausted. So you're going to have to work very hard to do sample number 7 justice, given the attention you've been giving to the others. I would also, as with sample number 6, give it a little bit of water. Sorry, Gregor, that's really important. And I would think really hard with this sample about what's been going on in terms of not just the maturation, but where it comes from. There are some clues. If you really try hard in here, there are some clues. Where it comes from, how it's been matured, and what the flavours are. And this is a nice texture whiskey as well. So I suggest you think about the texture as you sip it, savour it. You can do it light to heavy when you do samples. We've really mixed them up, again, just to challenge you. But just give this one a little time and consideration, particularly the mouthfeel palate, because I think it's really very good example of something going on there. And we'll give you approximately 30 seconds.
As Ewan talks.
Can we jump to the next slide?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so I hope you've all made notes. So what we're going to do now is actually tell you what each of these whiskies are. But before we do each one, where are our mic holders, Kyle and Nick? If anyone wants to have a stab at what they think each of them are, or even have any notes on it, what flavors they got through from it. Did you like it?
Yeah,
did you not like it? Did you not like it? So we'll just go around the room and ask some questions. Does anyone have anything they want to say about whiskey number 1? Don't be shy. All right, Dave, do you want to tell them what it is? There's one fan of Cameron Bridge over there.
Grain whiskey. Considered to be no more than Scottish vodka, neutral spirit, rubbish. By law, it has to have character. Aged in predominantly first fill American oak casks. This will be a mix. This is new on the market, will be coming in the US beginning of next year. I think fantastic example of grain whiskey and a fantastic example of what American oak gives. So you get that textural quality of grain, that kind of citrus note, that kind of limey element, the coconut, the vanilla, the fudgy character, almost rum-like in a way, kind of bananas coming through, banana toffee, and a little spiciness in the end for some rejuvenated casks coming through on here as well. And that, for me, when I first tasted that, it's almost like a little cue into like reposado tequila. You know, so you've got really interesting flavors coming on. Grain whiskey is going to be really, really exciting new category. So watch out for it. Watch out for Hague Club. Where do you think this goes in the flavour map, guys?
So I think the way we'll do this is we have laser pens out there. I think, Nick, if you just stand at the back of the room and then shine it in the middle, and then we'll do a up, down, left, right, so you can all chime in, and hopefully you'll get it right.
Okay, so...
And don't look into the laser. This is like a cut price version of Tron you're about to see here. See?
So...
No.
Where are we? Are we
drinks
are we
last
smoky? No. Are we rich? Are we really light with no wood influence? No. The level of vanilla coming through for me kind of pushes this just across the line into that kind of beginning to rich. That's where all the American oak lurks. In terms of complexity, if you bring it right down to the bottom, we'll start bringing it up. So that's got just very delicate, more complexity. So tell us when to stop moving up this line. Stop. I would stop round about there. That's round about where Glenmorangie 10-year-old is, which is another good example of a lot of first fill American oak being used. So that's kind of our first plot. So if you've plotted it round about that area there, you're bang on. Okay, thank you.
All right, wonderful. Gregor?
Just say quickly, if you can remember what that tasted like, or if you still have some, two key things about it are the texture, which is quite remarkable for a Scotch whisky, and also the slight spiciness at the finish. And that spiciness is the signature of a certain type of rejuvenated cask. Spiciness.
Whiskey number 2.
Right. The second one.
No. Did you like it?
Yeah?
Put your hands up who liked it.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Oh, a lot of folk.
Jesus Christ.
That's good. Any ideas on what kind of cask it was in? European sherry cask. Yeah. Now it's quite interesting. Was it smoky? No. Was it Was it light? No. So it was rich. So let's have a look. I'll have a look and see where on the flavour map I think it is.
I think we tell them what it is first, though. Hello. Does anyone want to guess what region it came from? Anyone? No? All right.
But one, it is very rich. It looks like it's from a sherry cask. Yeah. Me, I'm not a great fan of sherry cask whiskies. It's not the flavours that really get me going. But I love what you can use this for. What you can use this type of whiskey, and it keeps deer away, rabbits, actually all rodents, and anyone from the Cattanach family. So you'd be good there.
But not German.
But yeah, it always has a place. It has a place. But yeah, I'll leave that to Nick to tell you a little bit more about where he would put this. But a lovely whiskey for some of you that you enjoyed it.
And we like to call you freaks, actually. So it is, Gregor?
It's Cardew. This is Cardew. Now, when we looked at that new make character, the new make whiskey spirit character slide, Cardew, that's on the light side. That's making a very light style of spirit. Really, really gentle spirit. So it's all about the kind of longish fermentation and distillation, lots of that copper contact. So they do a lot of work to keep that lightness of spirit. So Cardew, it's absolutely wonderful spirit. It makes great whiskey. But Nick was saying about a lot of our whiskies put into refill American oak, and refill American oak for Cardew, absolutely perfect for my palate. Into the sherry cask, a little bit strong for me.
Yeah, it's an overcooked whiskey, this. The cask is dominated. You've lost that distillery character. Remember Killer Graph? It's gone over that line. It's gone over that flip point. If I was wearing my single malt hat, my single malt hat is a pointy wizard's hat, because single malt's all about pointiness and intensity. I wouldn't want to bottle this, for it's not, there's no distillery character left. It's just a mouthful of tannin. If I was wearing my blender's hat, which is rounder, more like a turban, like Professor Quirrell. I would love this, because this would give me grip and power within a blend. So one cask of this in a blend would be a very, very useful thing. So this could be deliberately aged for a blend, but for a single malt, forget it. This is overcooked.
I think that's simple. And do we have any bartenders in the room? Hands up. Okay, so a good example or an analogy would be you wouldn't drink a glass of Angostura unless you're a freak. But if you're, and we have some in the room, but you do add it to a cocktail to give complexity, and that's the same way that we would use a whiskey like this.
Just so you know, we spend a long time trying to teach people about whiskey, and we do a lot of hands-on stuff, organoleptic assessment. This whiskey is from a cask, which I think is our best example of an overcooked cask. That's what we use it for, to demonstrate how maturation can go badly wrong over too much time. That's just for those of you that liked it so much.
The freaks, we'll just call them that.
And we've done it on the flavour map. So number 3 was my Royal Brackler moment.
Delicious.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this one? Do you like it, first of all? Yeah? Absolutely great. Single malt or blended Scotch whiskey? Hands up, single malt. Hands up, blended Scotch whiskey. It's just a couple. Okay.
Age, do we think it's old?
Old or young? What's young? The Royal Brackler was 12 years old that I tasted. 12, was it?
No, it was 14.
It's 14.
Yeah, what is young? You know, it was a lot. Was there huge cask influence here, or was there more distillery character? Hands up for lots and lots of wood. Hands up for more distillery character. You know, by a process of elimination, one is true.
Yeah. They're getting better at this.
Yeah.
I'm giving you 50-50 options here. You know?
8 to 10 years? 12, 15. So this is a 4-year-old whiskey. Okay? This is a truly wonderful 4-year-old whiskey. Yeah, no, it's because it's a cask sample. We just wanted to put Dufton up. Dufton, the distillery on Speyside, in the village of Dufton, capital of Speyside distilling. Known actually sort of traditionally for quite a different style of whiskey. So we've worked quite hard on the Dufton spirit character to move it into what we consider to be a better place over the past 10 or 15 years. And this one is a combination, again, it's a bit of cask magic. So Maureen Robinson, who Dave or Gregor, I think both mentioned, Maureen produced this sample especially for us, and her brief, so to Gregor's point about concept to market, her brief was a vibrant, delicious young whiskey. We didn't tell her what age, vibrant, delicious, young, and she produced that stunning 4-year-old sample. No sherry.
And so it's lost that immaturity. So there's enough cask coming
So,
through.
yeah,
So it's
think of the
driving
graph,
along
think of
that
the graph.
line. But you've lost the immaturity, but you've got this wonderful distillery character. So age, everybody thought it was 15. See, forget about it. Age is numbers. It's maturity that matters.
And on the flavour map, it's probably below the line. But it does have a richness to me, I think. So it's maybe not too far away from the Hay Club in position. It might be actually a bit richer. Yeah.
Okay, Dave, I think you're on the next whiskey.
Oh, Lord, so I am. Number 4. I'll just jump, because we are tight for time. I'll just jump straight onto probably what it is first. Did you think this was... well, I've got terrible faces in the front row here. Who enjoyed this one? And who doesn't like this particular character, you, sir? So, what do you think this was? Where do you think this one came from?
You need to jump forward.
Single malt?
Islay.
It's an Islay. This is Kalila Mock, no age statement, refill in bourbon, again in this kind of lively and vibrant character. No age statement coming through. That classic Kalila character is coming. That's lovely mix of kind of seaside and shore, lemon, a little bit of grassiness coming through, and also that very fresh smoke. It's like drying fishing nets.
Dave,
Not
Dave has a
fishnet
unique
tights,
nose.
Okay, fishing. No, it's how we actually fish. In Scotland.
There's
Not for
restraining
running.
orders in every harbour in Scotland.
The texture, that slight oiliness, which is typical of Kalila, and again, that real vibrancy. No great cask influence coming through on this. So where would you position this on the flavour map, guys? Yeah, above the line. So top left, yeah, bang on. Not as high as our bag, so probably kind of like the second from top line, and in maybe Yeah, probably just that end square round about there. So second top square, second line on the left-hand side, on the westerly approaches. Very good example of, again, no age statement, but real freshness and vibrancy. Try that if you can find this. Try this with soda water. It makes a brilliant highball.
I think you're next, Nick.
Whiskey number 5. So we'll do the same show of hands on whiskey number 5. Who liked it? Sorry, just do that again. I want to get that
Take a
embedded
picture.
in my memory. Right. Who didn't like it? Single malt or blend? Blend. Blend? Hands, show of hands? Just don't be shy. Blend. People seem to think it's a blend. Age? Any idea? Young?
More than 4.
More than 4.
Yeah.
10 years?
About 10.
We've got 10. It's like an auction. We've got 10 here.
Any advance in 10?
12. 10, 12. $1. $1.
Sold at 15.
If you tasted that, and then someone tried to sell you a bottle of it, these are for those of you that said you liked it, how much would you pay for that, just as a matter of interest? $40, $60, $65, $49.99. That's a good price point. Yeah, you must be from the retail segment, sir. I suspect. $80.90? Okay, it's going up. Okay, let's tell you about this one, whiskey number 5. Actually, I'll read to you what it says on my notes, which I didn't write. Okay, so I'm innocent.
That's where I get thrown under the bus, isn't it?
It says fucked cask. Haven't finished. Fuck cask, Glen knackered. Okay, so mystery, Speyside. It's a refill sherry cask. It's 42 years old. It's 41.5 ABV, which makes me think that
It had a tickle.
tickle, as we call it in the trade, because it has to be 40% before it can be called whiskey. We can't tell you where it came from. I'm glad to say it's not a Diageo whiskey. This is again, for classroom purposes, this is a real stinker. It's an old whiskey which has been in a cask that's sort of, sometimes, knackered casks, as we call them, can deliver gems. They really can. But more often than not, 42 years, and what have you got? You wouldn't clean your car windscreen with it, frankly.
And it took us a long time to find it as well. A whiskey this shite.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. See, he's still got all that immaturity after all that time in cask, especially when you add water to it. It just falls apart completely. You've got that almost kind of cleaning products character to it. Which always a good indication of a knackered cask. You could save it. You could save this whiskey by decanting it into a very active first fill cask and bring it back to life over a couple of years. Although the alcohol level had dropped so far, it might be, beyond.
I was about to say something very rude about someone, but I'm not going to do that. And actually, out of respect for all the other whiskies on our flavour map, we're not even going to put this one on it. Okay? It is off the map.
Gregor?
Yeah.
I think we need to jump forward a slide. There you go.
Okay, so sample number 6. Yeah, it's like a breath of fresh air after sample number 5. But fresh air down at the seaside, maybe a little bonfire, kind of 2.2 miles to the southwest of you, just giving you a tickle on the nose there. Absolute beautiful whiskey, this one. It's. Does anyone want to have a stab on what distillery this is from?
Ardbeg.
Ardbeg.
So you're assuming it's a single malt then, just get that one.
Yeah.
It is not Ardbeg.
It's not Ardbeg, but where does Ardbeg lie on the flavour map?
Top left, yeah.
Top left. It's top, isn't it? So we're getting the
distillery
smoky.
character.
Yeah. This sample here got a really good balance of distillery character, use of wood, and also the higher alcohol content. This is at 57 ABV. Actually, I'll just pop the slide on. This is Talisker, 57 degrees north.
It's a cracker.
Absolute beautiful, beautiful whiskey. Captures that vibrancy of Talisker, the real kind of ruggedness of Talisker single malt. It's got the maturity is in there, the youthfulness, just the choice of different types of wood, different casks. Absolute beautiful. So again, I have a huge respect for that craft and being able to blend casks from one distillery together to create something like this. This is not for the people that don't like smoke, obviously, but I guess we'll do a show of hands on who enjoyed this one. Yeah, absolutely. And I find also it for those that don't like smoke, this is not a big frightening whiskey because there's so many layers of flavour, and getting these layers of flavour, yeah, hats off to the different cask types that are being used.
Okay, and Nick.
Whiskey number 7. Right.
All right.
Okay. Simple question: did you like it or did you not like it? Like?
Hands up for like.
Hands up. Any idea what distillery would you choose? Pick?
Shall we tell them?
It's going the wrong way. Oh, I've
gone
got
the
it
wrong
upside
way.
down. I've got it upside down. That explains why.
It's been a long day.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
Johnny Walker Red Label.
Johnny Red. Oh, what, really? I think you're full of shit.
The world's largest selling Scotch whiskey by an arm, a leg, a neck, and anything else you can think of.
Okay, there is another whiskey being passed out right now, but do you all have one? Hands up if you do not. All right. Well, they're being handed out right now. But we're going to start fielding questions. Shall we jump to the next slide? Okay, we have some microphones going around. Does anyone have any questions or any comments or anything? If not, then we're going to have to hand it back to Nick, who's going to talk. Oh, this gentleman. See? I got the hands going. Like a fucking rocket. Dislocated his shoulder.
On the maturation distillery character and immaturity chart, there was kind of a divot in all of the maturation lines. I was wondering if you could explain that.
Dave's good on divots.
I am one. It's interesting when you put whiskey into a cask because of that additive. You know, you've got the subtractive thing going on, and you've got the additive thing going on, which is where the oak influence is coming in, and that's absorbed actually relatively quickly and speedily. So it's a very kind of sharp upward line to begin with. And then, just at the start of like the kind of interactive process, things kind of ease off a little bit and kind of begin to slow down. And it's not the whiskey goes to sleep, it becomes more contemplative, if you want. And then it kind of drifts a little bit, and then it begins to pick up again. So that there are 3 quite distinct processes going on. But it's really important that that middle part, it's the interactive bit, that's really, really exciting. If you just put stuff into very small casks, and I know it's a way that craft distillers like to kind of boost their whiskies very quickly. You can understand for it makes them money, and it gets money in quickly. But the problem with using very small casks is that you drive right along that line very, very quickly, and you get additive stuff, and you get a little bit subtractive, but you get no interactive. And it's the interactive thing which makes whiskey whiskey. You know, it's not. You know, you can't. Whiskey needs time. It's a long-term project. So that interaction has to take place, and that's where cask influence comes through. It's where the spirit character comes through. They mix together, new flavors are created, and also oxygen is coming in. So you've got oxidative elements coming through. So that's it comes up, it mellows down as all that begins to take place, and then it kind of takes off again. So yeah, you have to have interaction. Hopefully that answered that.
Question over here.
Hi. Is there any you're speaking about rejuvenated barrels. Is there any change in the maturity, in how long it takes to mature because the thickness of the staves has changed?
It's not the thickness of the staves, but rejuvenated casks, properly prepared, will give you what you might call a greater degree of apparent maturity sooner than a non-rejuvenated cask. No, it's not. It's just about the woods.
It almost takes it back to brand new cask. It doesn't take it right back to brand new cask because some elements have been withdrawn from the wood. But when you rejuve, you take it back to slightly before first fill. Now, actually, the active layer, the layer that's actually giving all the flavour with the wood, it's only a couple of millimetres thick. You know, so it's when you're heating the cask, you're essentially caramelising the wood sugars. And then you heat it again, you put a charred layer on top of it. But it's really only a couple of millimetres thick. So it doesn't matter how thick the stave is. You're not actually going to get flavour any deeper in. Yeah, you're shaving off like maybe 2-3 mil, which, if anybody understands millimetres, is not very much at all. It's
they had a rebellion to get rid of that, I think.
It's about 1/8 of an inch, maybe. So it's a very, very small amount. And just by reheating, you're bringing the cask back to life again. But as Nick said, the integrity of the cask, if you keep flailing away at it, eventually the stave will become too thin and the cask will fall to bits. You don't want that. But yeah, hopefully, does that answer it? Yeah.
And that charring layer that they put in, that chemical process that goes on there is called pyrolysis, if you want to go and impress your friends. If you have any. Did you come on your own? He's that guy we were talking about earlier on, Nick.
I just wanted to say something about the final glass, which is whiskey number 8. And whatever you do, don't leave this behind. Take it with you. This is an absolutely stunning whiskey. Okay, believe me. Now you will have realised that what we've been trying to do this morning is sort of subvert or undermine some of your misconceptions or prejudice or beliefs, whatever you want to call them, about how age and maturation works with whiskey. And we spent a long time choosing these samples, okay, just to get it right and to make a real point home about younger whiskies being fantastic and older whiskies sometimes being not so fantastic, understatement. But there are times, and certainly in Diageo, because we've got so many distilleries, we've closed so many distilleries in the past, there are times when you just find a whiskey that's been sitting in a warehouse for a very long time and it is absolutely sublime and wonderful. And the whiskey in this glass is one of those examples. So we didn't want you to leave here just thinking that we were saying young whiskey great, old whiskey not great, because it's not as simple as that. It's very complex, in fact. And I think it's just a shame that when people talk about this or write about this, they don't grasp with the full complexity of the issue in order to have a more balanced view. So this final whiskey is us trying to balance the view. We're not going to tell you what it is. We're not going to tell you how old it is. And we're certainly not going to tell you how much it costs a bottle, because if we did, you would realise just how bloody lucky you are to take this drink out into the warm and humid streets of New Orleans and enjoy it on your way to lunch.
And I think it would be remiss of me not to thank Jim Sias, who is at the back of the room, for giving us these whiskies.
Indeed.
Jim. So what did we think of the 8th whiskey? We all had a chance to taste it. It's amazing. It's one of our favourite whiskies that have been out in recent years. It's incredible. We aren't going to tell you what it is because Nick's not a very nice person and wouldn't let us. No, but I think giving you this at the end just to show that you can grow old gracefully was a really important point that we wanted to make, and that the whiskey at the end is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily delicious and complex as well.
This is what happens in a cask, and I'm not going to give you precise numbers because we don't do numbers anymore. But this is what happens when you have very, very relaxed maturation for a long period of time. You know, the cask, not a huge amount of cask activity. This has mainly been driven by oxidation. And it's very, very gentle. And you get that real soft tropical fruit character that you really only get after a long, long period in very, very gentle maturation conditions. Spiciness, a kind of dazzling spiciness. Again, typical of old oxidized whiskies. Yeah, phenomenal, phenomenal dram. They're rare, these.
And that's us. Look at that. Perfect. So, before we all leave and go on our merry way, I'd like to thank the volunteers and the caps who helped set up this room.
Thank you, Nathan.
I would like to thank the Master Whiskey team who helped set up the room and went around with the microphones haranguing you. Of course, the panelists here as well. Less of a clap for you. And did you all enjoy it? Yes. Good. So there's a room next door. I want you to give the bigger cheers so they sound like they suck. All right? Ready? Go.